Hello, everybody. We are WIDA Group 2. WIDA Group 2 consists of Chandler, Lach, Amanda Weise, Miyako, Cauley, Matthew Murphy, and Courtney Coleman. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, what is WIDA? WIDA is World-Class Instructional Design and Assessment. It's an acronym used by a consortium of state departments of education. So, a consortium is basically that a group or an aggregate. So in this case, that's a group or aggregate of state departments of education that have worked together. So of that, there's 37 states plus the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the Northern Mariana Islands. So together, they've developed this set of proficiency standards and assessments for K-12 English language learners. So, why use WIDA? WIDA works with Common Core. This is the biggest selling point for WIDA. So, think about WIDA as an extension of Common Core that concentrates on the language aspects of the content inside of a mainstream classroom. So, Common Core says at this point a student needs to be able to do this. WIDA says, okay, that student needs to be able to do this, but they also need to have the language to communicate that. So, what this means and what it looks like is that in your mainstream English class, your mainstream science class, your mainstream social studies class, you're still teaching the same content. You're still teaching with Common Core, but you're also diversifying your instruction with WIDA so that you can make accommodations for your English language learners so that they're still learning the content and they're also still learning the language involved in the content. So, why WIDA? WIDA is versatile, which means that it can be used for a lot of different things. It can be used to track short-term growth, long-term growth, day-to-day assessments, anything like that. Along with that, WIDA can be used as a diagnostic test, or it has a diagnostic test, excuse me. So, you have a student that comes from the Middle East with no documentation of past education. You're not really sure how to approach their language education. WIDA says, we have a test for that. You have the student take the test, you get the test results back. All of a sudden, you have realized what level the student's at and how you can best fit their needs in the classroom. And like I said before, this will be in the mainstream classroom. Along with that is applicable formative assessments. So using model performance indicators, we'll talk about those later, you can make sure that your student is progressing through the language steps that WIDA outlines. Lastly, it informs your summative assessments. So, those sorts of state-mandated tests. Some students, you'll be able to say, oh, this student doesn't meet this requirement, it doesn't meet this level, so this student isn't going to take the test. Or you can fashion your unit test so you can say, oh, this student needs to reach this point by this time. Okay, this is what we're going to teach for this unit. So, moving forward, we'll talk more about WIDA, we'll talk more about how it's going to look in the classroom.
Now we're going to move into a facet of WIDA called Access. Access is an assessment designed for students in kindergarten through 12th grade. These are students who have been identified as English language learners, and it is used to assess English language proficiency. It's given annually to WIDA Consortium member states, and so therefore, because it's given annually, it monitors students' progress in academic English acquisition. It's important to note this is academic English, so we talk about this conversational English as BICS and academic English as CALP, and these are learned at different levels. And so this really tries to look at the academic English. It serves a variety of purposes for a variety of pupil groups. First, for students, it understands students' proficiencies and determines their readiness to join the mainstream classes. So it really shows whether they can leave ESL class or whether they need to stay. For teachers, it provides information to be used in enhancing instruction and learning programs for ELs, which can be very helpful for differentiation or helpful for helping students with different skill areas. For parents, it provides information on student level, progress, and improvement, which is great for how parents can help students at home. It really shows where their children are at with this academic language instead of just the conversational English. And for districts, it provides information that will help evaluate the ESL and bilingual programs within their schools. It can really show if an ESL program needs to be increased or more funds need to be given to it. On this next slide, I have an example of an access question. On the left, we see a picture of the water circulation in the atmosphere with a short paragraph that describes this process, this cycle. And on the right, we see 3 different questions. This would be a reading test question for grades 6 through 8. The first question happens at level 1. So we see a picture that students have to correlate with the general idea of the picture on the left. This does not require a lot of high-level reading skills, and students do not need to be able to read this paragraph in order to get this question right. However, in the second question, we move up to level 2. It becomes a little bit more cognitively demanding because instead of just matching a picture with an idea, students must match a picture with a concept given within the paragraph on the left. Even more in the third question, we see it become even more cognitively demanding as it moves to level 3, because now students do not have the picture as scaffolding. Students must be able to read the sentence and comprehend what the question is asking, as well as comprehend what the paragraph is telling them on the left. So this is a little bit higher. And so these levels correspond with model performance indicators, which we will talk about in the next section.
Next, we will discuss Model Performance Indicators, also known as MPIs. MPIs describe a specific language proficiency within a domain. MPIs show examples of language expectations at different levels of language proficiency across different language domains. They are divided by language domain, example topics, and proficiency level. For each domain, there are MPIs for proficiency levels 1 through 5. These sets of MPIs are called strands, and this arrangement helps students and teachers see how language may look as a progression from one level of proficiency to the next. MPIs reflect the second language acquisition process and describe the ways in which students can use the language. They will each include the language function, in other words, the task you must complete with the language, the content stem, or how it is connected to the content goal, and the type of support, or how the task supports the practice of the language function. In addition, they provide a basis for curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Educators are encouraged to modify existing MPIs to match their students' performance levels in language development, create language objectives, and differentiate the language of the content to match the student's proficiency level. This is an example of an MPI for Strand 2, the language of language arts, for grade level 4, and the sample topic of narration. We can see that the language function, content stem, and type of support are present in each MPI. Here is an example of a strand of MPIs. A strand refers to the row of proficiency levels for one domain within a standard and grade level. This strand is for the speaking language domain for WIDA Standard 4, the language of science. Notice how each MPI has an example of a language expectation within the standard. In addition, there are examples of topics that can be used for each level. As the level of proficiency increases from left to right, the language expectation also increases. MPIs have a significance in creating assessments. Teachers can use MPIs as examples of language objectives to use in the classroom, and use these objectives to make assessments, whether they be formative or summative.
Now let's look at the first assessment we created. This assessment was created based on a 9th grade ESL class, which could consist of many different ESL students. It isn't limited to any particular group of ESL students. It is also based on a science class, which is currently studying genetics and heredity. we wanted to focus on showing that any subject and topic could be used with the WIDA standards and MPIs. Lastly, we decided to focus on reading for this assessment. Based off of these students, this subject, and this topic, we have chosen to follow a Level 2 MPI under WIDA standards, which states the following. Students will sort pictures and phrases into categories. Based on this information and MPI, we created a language objective for this assessment that follows along closely. Students can read descriptive sentences and match pictures to relevant descriptors. Now let's look over the assessment and talk about it in detail. The procedure is as follows. Students will be given a sheet of paper with a list of descriptive sentences. They will also be given a set of images that associate with the list of descriptors. The students will then read each descriptor and place one image next to each sentence. The image must be related to the sentence's description to be correct. We made sure to avoid any chance of mistaking one photo for another by making sure certain sentences negated any chance of choosing the wrong image for the sentence. For example, there are images of 3 males. One has blue eyes, one has hazel eyes, and one has brown eyes. In the sentences associated with the men, there are statements that help distinguish whether or not we are talking about a certain set of eyes. In the first sentence, there is no statement about eyes at all, meaning that students only look for a boy with freckles. In the next sentence, we make sure to narrow down which color we are looking for by negating both hazel eyes of the boy with freckles and brown eyes of the man with dimples. The same steps have been taken for the images of the females as well. All of this has been done to make sure that this test is both valid and reliable.
Hello, my name is Courtney, and I will be going over example 2 that is included on the WIDA group project. For example 2, the topic that we will be addressing is Michigan history. This is a major part of the curriculum for grade 4 students in Michigan. The WIDA standard is the language of social studies. The domain that we will be focusing on is writing. This will be assessed later. This goes hand in hand with the Common Core standard listed above. This Common Core standard states that students will be able to comprehend concepts related to Michigan's major economic activities: agriculture, mining, manufacturing, lumbering, tourism, technology, and research, from statehood to present. Investigate the development of the major economic activities. This slide shows an example of Level 1 entering assessment. Students will be able to label pictures of Michigan's major economic activities in Level 1 of the writing MPI strand. For example, the educator will pass out pictures of different types of economic activities in Michigan. Using the vocabulary associated for the content area, students will be able to label each picture according to what they see. This slide shows examples for assessments that can be given for the reading and writing domains for each strand. I am using writing for this example because I used it in the aforementioned example. I use level 1.1, but for level 2 beginning, I can use the same thing, the same example that was given, and allow the students to go further. For example, instead of just manufacturing, the students can say manufacturing in Detroit, Michigan, or Ford assembly line manufacturing as a phrase for the picture.